The sound of a single gunshot echoed through the canyon, sending a flock of startled crows into the crisp autumn sky as Eliza Kincaid ran for her life. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a blacksmith's hammer, each breath burning in her lungs as she fled through the scrubby landscape outside Los Alamos, New Mexico Territory, 1883. The bounty hunter's bullet had only grazed her shoulder, but the sharp sting and the warm trickle of blood down her arm reminded her that the next shot might find its mark. "I did not steal that money," she whispered to herself, the words becoming a desperate mantra as her boots pounded the hard, packed earth. "I did not steal that money," but in Los Alamos, her protests had fallen on deaf ears. The bank manager's accusation, the missing $5,000, and the convenient appearance of $200 in her modest home had been enough to condemn her. No one had believed the young schoolteacher when she claimed she was being framed. No one except perhaps her father, but his faith in her hadn't been enough to save her from the threat of prison or worse. The distant sound of hoofbeats made Eliza's blood run cold. She glanced over her shoulder, her long auburn hair whipping across her face as she spotted a lone rider cresting the ridge behind her. The bounty hunter was gaining ground, and ahead of her lay nothing but open country with little cover. A dilapidated mining shack appeared on the horizon like a mirage. With renewed desperation, Eliza pushed herself harder, ignoring the burning in her legs and the blood now soaking the sleeve of her once pristine blouse. The shack might offer temporary shelter, perhaps a weapon, or at the very least a moment to catch her breath and think. As she drew closer, she noticed a horse tethered outside a magnificent chestnut stallion with a white blaze down its nose. Someone was already there. Friend or foe, she had no choice but to find out. Eliza burst through the door, startling the tall man who stood examining something on a crude wooden table. He spun around, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. "Please," she gasped, pressing herself against the closed door. "There's a bounty hunter after me. I need help." The stranger studied her with intense green eyes beneath the shadow of his black Stetson. His face was weathered by sun and wind, a short beard framing a strong jaw. He looked to be in his early 30s, his broad shoulders filling out a dusty denim shirt beneath a worn leather vest. "And why would a bounty hunter be after a lady like yourself?" he asked, his voice deep and cautious. "They think I stole money from the bank in Los Alamos," she said, wincing as she touched her wounded shoulder. "But I didn't. I've been framed." The man's eyes narrowed, taking in her bloodied shoulder and the fear in her eyes. Before he could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both tense. "Please," Eliza whispered, "I have nowhere else to go." The stranger crossed the room in 2 long strides, peering out the small, grimy window. "That'd be Hank Monroe," he said grimly. "Not known for bringing in bounties alive if they give him trouble." He turned back to her, decision made. "Behind the stove, now." Eliza ducked behind the rusted cast iron stove just as the bounty hunter's boots hit the ground outside. She held her breath, praying that this stranger wouldn't betray her to Monroe. The door creaked open and Hank Monroe's bulky frame filled the entrance. "Vaughn Westley," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "Didn't expect to find you in these parts." "Just passing through," the stranger Vaughn replied casually. "What brings you out here, Monroe?" "Tracking a thief," Monroe said, his eyes sweeping the small interior of the shack. "Young woman, auburn hair, stole from the Los Alamos bank, shot at her a ways back, but she's slippery." "A woman." Vaughn raised an eyebrow. "Haven't seen anyone but you today. What'd she steal?" $5,000, Monroe said, stepping further into the shack. "Found some of it in her house. Bank manager wants her brought in, dead or alive." He sniffed the air. "You alone in here, Wesley?" Eliza pressed herself harder against the wall, trying to make herself as small as possible. The wound on her shoulder throbbed painfully. "Just me and the dust," Vaughn said evenly. "Though I did see tracks heading west about an hour ago. Could have been your thief." Monroe studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Always did hear you had a good eye for tracks, Wesley." He turned toward the door but paused. "You heading back to Los Alamos soon?" "Got business elsewhere," Vaughn replied. "Good hunting, Monroe." The bounty hunter tipped his hat and left. Eliza remained frozen in place until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. Only then did she emerge from her hiding place, legs shaking. "Why did you help me?" she asked, clutching her wounded shoulder. Vaughn Westley eyed her carefully. "I've known Hank Monroe for years. If he's hunting you, you're either the cleverest thief I've ever met," his gaze drifted to her bloodied shoulder, "or you're telling the truth." "They said I lied," Eliza whispered, her voice breaking. "No one in town would believe me." Vaughn stepped closer, his expression softening slightly. "Then let them watch me prove you true," he said, his voice low and determined. "But first, let's tend to that shoulder." Eliza stared at him, bewildered by this unexpected alliance. "You believe me, just like that?" "I've got a good sense for liars," Vaughn said, retrieving a canteen from his saddlebag. "And you don't strike me as one. Besides," he added with a hint of a smile, "I've got my reasons to distrust the good folks of Los Alamos myself." As Vaughn cleaned and bandaged her wound with surprising gentleness, Eliza felt the first glimmer of hope she'd experienced in days. The schoolteacher and the cowboy strangers thrust together by circumstance, bound by a common enemy, and about to embark on a journey that would change both their lives forever. "I'm Eliza," she said softly. "Eliza Kincaid." "Vaughn Westley," he replied, securing the bandage with practiced hands. "Now, Miss Kincaid, tell me everything about this bank robbery you didn't commit." As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the New Mexico desert, Eliza began to tell her story, unaware that the man listening would soon risk everything to clear her name and steal her heart in the process. Eliza settled onto a rickety chair as Vaughn finished tending to her wound. The pain had subsided to a dull throb, but her predicament remained dire. "I've been the schoolteacher in Los Alamos for 2 years now," she began. "It's not much of a position, but it's respectable work. My father, Gilbert Kincaid, runs the livery stable in town. We're not wealthy, but we've always been honest folk." Vaughn nodded, leaning against the table as he listened. 3 days ago, the bank was robbed, $5,000 taken from the safe. No one saw who did it, but later that day, the bank manager, Malcolm Prescott, led the sheriff to my home. Her voice caught. "They found $200 hidden under a floorboard in my bedroom, money I never put there." "Prescott," Vaughn said, his expression darkening. "Malcolm Prescott is still running that bank?" "Yes," Eliza said, surprised by his reaction. "Do you know him? We've crossed paths," Vaughn answered cryptically. "Go on." "There was a trial, if you can call it that. It lasted less than an hour. 2 witnesses claimed they saw me near the bank around the time of the robbery, though I was actually at the schoolhouse preparing lessons." Eliza shook her head bitterly. "Sheriff Jenkins ordered me held until a circuit judge arrives next week, but my father helped me escape last night. He told me to run to find help. And now Monroe's after you." "Yes, the bank is offering a $500 reward." Eliza looked up at him, her hazel eyes earnest. "Mr. Westley, I've never stolen anything in my life. I don't know why Prescott would frame me, but I swear I'm innocent." Vaughn studied her for a long moment. "I believe you," he finally said, "and I think I know why Prescott might want you gone." Hope flickered in Eliza's eyes. "You do?" "Malcolm Prescott built that bank on stolen money and broken promises," Vaughn explained, his voice hardening. 10 years ago, he swindled my father out of our family ranch. When Pa tried to expose him, Prescott arranged an accident. My father died, Prescott kept our land, and I was run out of town with nothing but my horse and the clothes on my back." "I'm so sorry," Eliza said softly. "I've spent the last decade building a new life and gathering evidence against him," Vaughn continued. "I was on my way back to Los Alamos to finally settle the score when our paths crossed." "That's why you were studying those papers," Eliza realized, gesturing to the documents on the table. Vaughn nodded. "Bank records, witness statements, proof of Prescott's corruption, but it still might not be enough." He paused, considering her. "What's your connection to Prescott? There must be a reason he chose to frame you specifically." Eliza flushed slightly. "He's proposed marriage to me twice. I refused both times. The last time was just a week ago." Vaughn's eyebrows rose. "Prescott's at least 20 years your senior." 25, Eliza corrected with distaste. "He said a schoolteacher's salary could never provide the comforts a woman needs." When I told him I valued my independence more than his money, he wasn't pleased. A scorned suitor with power, Vaughn mused. That's a dangerous combination. What should we do? Eliza asked. First, we need to get you somewhere safe, Vaughn decided. I have a friend with a cabin about half a day's ride from here. Then we gather more evidence. Prescott's careful, but he must have made mistakes with the robbery. If we can prove he framed you. We can clear my name, Eliza finished, a determined gleam in her eye. And possibly bring down Prescott in the process, Vaughn added. The fading daylight cast long shadows through the shack's lone window. Eliza glanced outside nervously. Monroe could return. He won't, Vaughn assured her. He'll follow the false trail west for at least a day before doubling back. By then, we'll be long gone. He gathered his papers and tucked them into a saddlebag. Can you ride? I grew up in a livery stable, Eliza reminded him with a small smile. I've been riding since before I could walk. Good, we'll leave at first light, Vaughn said. You should rest. I'll keep watch. As night fell across the New Mexico territory, Eliza wrapped herself in a worn blanket Vaughn provided and settled into the corner of the shack. Despite her exhaustion, sleep remained elusive as her mind raced with the day's events. Mr. Westley, she called softly into the darkness. Vaughn, he corrected. If we're going to clear your name together, you might as well use my given name. Vaughn, she repeated. Why are you helping me? Your quarrel with Prescott is personal, but my troubles could complicate your plans. In the moonlight filtering through the window, she could see him turn toward her, his face half in shadow. Maybe I recognize a kindred spirit, he said quietly. Someone else who's been wronged by Malcolm Prescott and left with nowhere to turn. He paused. Or maybe I'm just tired of seeing that man destroy lives without consequence. Eliza nodded, accepting his answer even as she sensed there might be more to it than he was revealing. Thank you, she whispered. Try to sleep, Eliza, he replied. Tomorrow will be a long day. As she drifted off, Eliza realized it was the first time he'd used her given name. Despite everything, it brought her a strange comfort as she surrendered to exhaustion. Dawn broke with a palette of pinks and oranges that painted the desert landscape in ethereal light. Eliza woke to find Vaughn already preparing for their departure, his movements efficient and deliberate as he packed his few belongings. How's the shoulder? He asked when he noticed her watching him. Eliza rotated it gingerly. Painful, but I'll manage, Vaughn nodded, seemingly satisfied with her assessment. We should reach Michael's cabin by midday if we make good time. Who is Michael? Eliza asked, accepting the jerky and hardtack Vaughn offered for breakfast. Michael Thornton. Fought alongside me in a few skirmishes against the Apaches years back when I was scouting for the army, Vaughn explained. He turned his back on civilization after the war. Lives alone in the mountains now, but he's a good man. He'll help us. They set out as the sun cleared the horizon, Eliza riding double with Vaughn on his chestnut stallion. The powerful horse seemed unfazed by the additional burden, maintaining a steady pace as they headed northeast toward the distant mountains. Riding pressed against Vaughn's back, Eliza was acutely aware of his physical presence, the solid breadth of his shoulders, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the faint scent of leather and sage that seemed to emanate from him. It was an unexpected intimacy that made her simultaneously uncomfortable and oddly secure. You said you've been gathering evidence against Prescott for 10 years, she said, breaking the silence that had settled between them. What have you been doing all this time? Vaughn was quiet for so long that Eliza thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried over his shoulder to her. After I left Los Alamos, I drifted. Worked as a ranch hand, a tracker, even rode with the Texas Rangers for a spell, he said. 5 years ago, I won a small silver mine in a poker game up in Colorado. Turned out to be more profitable than the previous owner realized. Gave me the means to pursue Prescott properly. You're a silver mine owner? Eliza couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Among other things, Vaughn replied, and she could hear the slight smile in his voice. Does that change your opinion of me, schoolteacher? I'm still forming my opinion, Eliza responded honestly. Their journey took them through rugged terrain that gradually gave way to pine-covered foothills. By midday, as Vaughn had predicted, they approached a small cabin nestled against a rocky outcropping, nearly invisible among the trees. Careful now, Vaughn warned as they approached. Michael's particular about visitors. As if on cue, a gruff voice called out from the tree line. That's far enough, stranger, Vaughn reined in his horse. It's Vaughn Westley, Michael. I've brought a friend who needs help. A moment of silence followed before a barrel-chested man with a salt and pepper beard emerged from the trees, a rifle held casually in his hands. His weathered face broke into a smile when he confirmed Vaughn's identity. "Wesley, you son of a gun," he greeted, lowering his weapon. "Been, what, 2 years?" "Too long," Vaughn agreed, dismounting and helping Eliza down. Michael's eyes widened slightly at the sight of Eliza, particularly her bloodied sleeve. "Bounty hunters," he guessed. "How did you know?" Eliza asked. Michael chuckled. "Only 3 things bring Vaughn Westley to my doorstep: bounty hunters, business opportunities, or beautiful women in trouble. Looks like I hit the trifecta today." Eliza felt her cheeks warm at the implication, but Vaughn merely shook his head. "It's a long story, old friend. Mind if we come in and tell it?" Michael's cabin was surprisingly comfortable inside, with sturdy furniture and well-crafted amenities that spoke to his skills as a woodworker. After hearing their full story over a simple but hearty stew, the older man leaned back in his chair, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "Malcolm Prescott," he mused. "Always knew that snake would slither to the top eventually, never trusted a man with hands that soft." He looked at Eliza. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need, Miss Kincaid. Anyone Prescott's trying to ruin is a friend of mine." "Thank you," Eliza said sincerely, "but I can't hide forever. I need to clear my name." "And we will," Vaughn assured her, "but we need a plan." As dusk settled over the mountains, the 3 of them strategized around Michael's rough-hewn table. Vaughn spread out his documents, showing years of meticulous record keeping that outlined Prescott's questionable banking practices. "The problem," Vaughn explained, "is that most of this is circumstantial. We need something definitive that ties Prescott directly to the robbery and your framing." "What about the money?" Eliza suggested. "The real robber took $5,000, but only $200 was planted in my home. Where's the rest?" "Good question," Michael said, nodding approvingly. "Follow the money." "Prescott wouldn't keep it at the bank," Vaughn reasoned. "Too risky." "And probably not at his home either." "His hunting cabin," Michael suggested suddenly. "He still has that place up by Sawyer's Creek." Vaughn nodded slowly, recognition dawning. "Yes, about 20 miles outside of town. Isolated, seldom visited except by Prescott himself." "Perfect place to hide stolen money," Michael agreed. "But how do we get there without being caught?" Eliza asked. "Monroe's probably told the whole town to be on the lookout for me by now. We'll need a disguise for you," Vaughn decided. "And a distraction in town to keep attention elsewhere while we investigate the cabin." Michael rose from the table and disappeared into a back room, returning with a bundle of clothing and a hat. "My late wife's things," he explained, a fleeting sadness crossing his features. "She was about your size. These might help." Eliza accepted the garments gratefully. "I'm sorry for your loss." Michael nodded in acknowledgement. "Been 5 years now. Sarah would have liked you. She had no patience for men like Prescott either." As night fell fully, their plan began to take shape. Michael would return to Los Alamos tomorrow, ostensibly to sell furs and purchase supplies, while gathering information about Prescott's movements. Meanwhile, Vaughn and Eliza would make their way to Prescott's hunting cabin to search for evidence. "You should get some rest," Michael told them. "I've made up the spare room for you, Miss Kincaid. Vaughn can take the floor out here." Alone in the small bedroom, Eliza changed into the clean nightgown Michael had provided. She carefully unwrapped the bandage on her shoulder to examine the wound. The bleeding had stopped, but the area was tender and inflamed. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Eliza," Vaughn called quietly, "I brought some salve for your shoulder." She quickly pulled the nightgown up to cover herself. "Come in." Vaughn entered, averting his eyes respectfully as he handed her a small tin. "Michael makes this himself. It'll help with the healing and keep infection at bay." "Thank you," Eliza said, taking the tin. She hesitated, then added, "Would you mind? That is, I can't quite reach." Understanding immediately, Vaughn moved behind her. With surprisingly gentle fingers for a man of his size, he applied the salve to her wound. His touch was clinical, efficient, yet Eliza couldn't help the slight quickening of her pulse at his proximity. "You were brave today," he said softly as he worked. "Most people would have broken down after what you've been through." "I've had little choice but to be brave," Eliza replied, "though I admit I'm terrified of what lies ahead." Vaughn finished applying the salve and carefully placed a fresh bandage over the wound. "Fear keeps us sharp," he said, "but don't let it rule you. We'll face this together." As he turned to leave, Eliza caught his wrist. "Vaughn," she said, meeting his gaze directly, "thank you. Not just for this, but for believing me when no one else would." Something flickered in his green eyes, something warm and unexpected that made Eliza's breath catch. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his usual guarded expression. "Get some sleep, Eliza," he said gently. "Tomorrow we start fighting back." After he left, Eliza lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the night sounds of the mountains. 2 days ago, she had been a respectable schoolteacher with a simple life. Now she was a fugitive, wounded, hunted, dependent on the help of a mysterious cowboy with his own vendetta against the man who had framed her. Yet despite everything, as sleep finally claimed her, Eliza realized she felt safer than she had in days. Whatever came next, she wasn't facing it alone anymore. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the mountain air crisp with the promise of approaching autumn. Eliza woke to the aroma of coffee and the low murmur of male voices from the main room. She dressed quickly in Sarah Thornton's clothing, a simple blue calico dress, slightly worn but clean and well-made, and arranged her hair in a practical bun beneath the wide-brimmed hat Michael had provided. When she emerged from the bedroom, both men turned to look at her. "Well, I'll be," Michael said with approval. "You look like a different woman, Miss Kincaid." Vaughn said nothing, but his lingering gaze made Eliza feel strangely self-conscious. She accepted the cup of coffee he offered her and took a seat at the table where breakfast waited: cornbread, bacon, and early apples from the tree behind the cabin. "I'll head to town within the hour," Michael explained as they ate. "Should be back by nightfall with whatever news I can gather. Meanwhile, you two can make your way to Prescott's cabin. It's about 3 hours' ride from here, due southeast." "We'll need to be careful," Vaughn cautioned. "Prescott occasionally sends men to check on the place, even when he's not using it." "I'll leave my rifle for Miss Kincaid," Michael offered. "You know how to shoot." "My father taught me," Eliza confirmed, "though I've never shot at a person." "Let's hope you won't need to start now," Vaughn said grimly. Michael left soon after, his packhorse loaded with furs and his saddlebags carrying their list of specific supplies they would need. Eliza watched him disappear down the trail with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. "He's a good man," she observed. "One of the best," Vaughn agreed, checking the cinch on his saddle. Ready to ride, the journey to Prescott's cabin took them through increasingly rugged terrain, following game trails and old Indian paths that Vaughn seemed to know intimately. They rode mostly in silence, both alert for any sign of danger. By midday, they had descended from the higher elevations into a secluded valley where a small creek bubbled between rocky banks. "Sawyer's Creek," Vaughn explained. "Prescott's cabin should be about a half-mile upstream." They dismounted and led the horse through the denser woodland, approaching more cautiously now. When they spotted the cabin, a substantial structure of logs and stone with a covered porch and glass windows, they tethered the horse in a concealed spot and observed from the cover of the trees. "No smoke from the chimney," Eliza noted. "No horses." "Doesn't mean it's empty," Vaughn cautioned. "Wait here while I circle around back." Eliza watched anxiously as Vaughn moved like a shadow through the trees, his practiced stealth betraying years of experience in situations where being seen meant danger. He returned several minutes later, shaking his head. "No signs of recent activity," he reported. "The door's locked, but there's a window in the back that's not fully secured." They approached the cabin together, alert for any sounds or movements. At the rear of the structure, Vaughn worked a small knife between the window sash and frame, carefully lifting the simple latch inside. The window opened with a slight creak, and Vaughn helped Eliza climb through before following her. The cabin's interior was dim and musty, suggesting it hadn't been occupied for several weeks. Expensive furniture and fixtures contrasted with the rustic exterior, including a large desk, leather chairs, and ornate oil lamps. "This is no hunting cabin," Eliza observed. "This is a retreat." Prescott always did enjoy his comforts, Vaughn said dryly. "Look for anything unusual: hidden compartments, loose floorboards, recent correspondence." They searched methodically, careful not to disturb anything too noticeably. Eliza examined the desk while Vaughn checked the walls and floor for hiding places. After nearly an hour, their search had yielded nothing significant. "There has to be something," Eliza said, frustration evident in her voice. She stood in the center of the main room, hands on her hips as she surveyed their surroundings once more. Her gaze fell on the stone fireplace, specifically the uneven stacking of the hearthstones. "Vaughn," she called softly, "look at this." She knelt by the fireplace, her fingers exploring the irregular stonework. One stone moved slightly under her touch. Working together, they managed to remove it completely, revealing a small cavity behind. Inside was a canvas bag. Vaughn pulled it out and opened it, revealing stacks of banknotes. "This is it," he said, quickly counting. $4,800. "The stolen money minus the $200 planted in your home." Eliza's heart raced. "This proves it was Prescott." "Not quite," Vaughn cautioned. "It proves the money is here, but not that Prescott put it here. We need more." Deeper in the cavity, Vaughn found a leather-bound ledger. As they examined it by the window light, their excitement grew. The ledger contained detailed records of Prescott's illegal activities spanning years: inflated loans, embezzlement, even evidence of his scheme to frame Eliza. "October 15, 1883, Vaughn read aloud. "Payment to JT. $500 for special assignment at bank." He looked up at Eliza. "That's 2 days before the robbery." "JT," Eliza repeated. "James Tucker, he's one of Prescott's regular cronies in town, works as a guard at the bank occasionally." Vaughn continued reading. "October 17, EK problem resolved. Evidence planted." He met Eliza's eyes. "That's you." He was documenting the framing. Eliza felt vindicated yet sickened. He wrote it all down, the arrogance. "Men like Prescott never imagine they'll be caught," Vaughn said, carefully wrapping the ledger and money in his bandana. "This is exactly what we need." A sudden noise outside made them both freeze. Through the window, they glimpsed a rider approaching a man in a gray coat and black hat that they both recognized immediately. "Tucker," Eliza whispered. "What's he doing here?" "Nothing good," Vaughn replied grimly. "We need to leave. Now." They quickly replaced the stone in the fireplace, erasing signs of their presence. The front door rattled as Tucker tried the handle. "Back window," Vaughn mouthed, guiding Eliza toward their entry point. They had just slipped outside when they heard the front door open. Crouching low, they moved quickly through the trees toward their horse. A shout from the cabin told them their intrusion had been discovered. "He's seen the disturbed hearth," Vaughn said, helping Eliza onto the horse before mounting behind her. "Ride." They galloped away from the cabin, no longer concerned with stealth. A gunshot cracked behind them, the bullet splintering bark from a tree to their left. "Keep your head down," Vaughn ordered, spurring the horse to greater speed. They raced along the creek, then veered into denser forest where the trees would provide cover. 2 more shots followed, but both went wide as Tucker struggled to aim while pursuing them. "We can't lead him back to Michael's," Eliza shouted over the pounding hoofbeats. "We won't," Vaughn assured her, guiding the horse up a steep embankment. "I know these mountains better than Tucker ever will." For the next hour, they followed an erratic path through the wilderness, crossing streams, doubling back, and utilizing terrain that would confuse any pursuit. Finally, when Vaughn was confident they had lost Tucker, they slowed to rest the winded horse. In a small clearing, Vaughn dismounted and helped Eliza down. Her legs trembled from the hard ride and the surge of fear. Without thinking, she leaned against Vaughn's chest, seeking stability. His arms came around her automatically, steadying her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low near her ear. Eliza nodded, suddenly very aware of their proximity. She could feel his heartbeat, strong and surprisingly steady given their narrow escape. Yes, she managed, just shaken. Vaughn didn't immediately release her, and Eliza didn't pull away. For a moment, they stood together in the dappled forest light, connected by shared danger and growing trust. We have the evidence, she said finally, looking up at him. What do we do now? Something shifted in Vaughn's expression as he gazed down at her, something that made Eliza's breath catch. But the moment passed as he gently set her away from him. Now we rendezvous with Michael, he said, his voice returning to its usual practical tone. And then we take the fight to Prescott. As they remounted and continued their journey more cautiously, Eliza found herself replaying that brief, charged moment in the clearing. Despite the danger that still surrounded them, despite the uncertainty of what lay ahead, she couldn't deny the growing awareness that her feelings toward Vaughn Westley were becoming dangerously complicated. And from the occasional glance he cast her way as they rode, she wondered if perhaps he was wrestling with similar complications. Night had fallen by the time they returned to Michael's cabin, approaching cautiously until they spotted his horse in the small corral behind the structure. A lamp burned in the window, casting a warm glow into the darkness. Something's wrong, Vaughn said suddenly, drawing his revolver. What is it? Eliza whispered, tensing. Michael always keeps the left shutter closed at night, a signal we arranged years ago. It's open now. They dismounted some distance from the cabin, tethering the horse out of sight. Vaughn handed Eliza Michael's rifle. Stay behind me. If there's trouble, don't hesitate to shoot. They approached the cabin from the rear, moving silently through the shadows. Vaughn peered through the back window, then quickly pulled away, his expression grim. Monroe's inside, he whispered, and one of Prescott's men. They've got Michael. Eliza's heart sank. Is he hurt? Doesn't look it, but they've tied him to a chair. Vaughn thought for a moment. We need a distraction. Let me create one, Eliza suggested. I can circle around front, make some noise to draw them out. You can slip in the back. Vaughn shook his head. Too dangerous. We don't have time to argue, Eliza insisted. Michael helped us, we can't leave him. After a moment of internal struggle, Vaughn nodded reluctantly. Circle wide. When you hear them coming out front, get to cover immediately. Don't try to be a hero. I'm a schoolteacher, not a gunslinger, Eliza reminded him with a tense smile. I know my limitations. She moved through the darkness, the rifle heavy in her hands. When she reached the front of the cabin, she took a deep breath, then fired a shot into the air and shouted, Monroe, I know you're in there. The cabin door burst open almost immediately. Monroe and another man, Eliza recognized him as David Wells, one of Prescott's associates, rushed onto the porch, guns drawn. It's the Kincaid woman, Wells shouted. Over there. Eliza had already ducked behind a large pine tree, her heart pounding as bullets splintered bark near her position. She fired once more in their direction, deliberately aiming high, then moved quickly to another tree inside the cabin. Vaughn slipped through the back door. Michael looked up, relief washing over his battered face. Took you long enough, he grunted as Vaughn cut his bonds. Can you move? Vaughn asked, helping his friend to his feet. They worked me over pretty good, but nothing's broken, Michael assured him, grabbing a shotgun from the wall rack. The girl with you, creating a distraction, Vaughn explained, moving toward the front of the cabin. Let's make sure she doesn't become a casualty. Outside, Monroe and Wells had split up, trying to flank Eliza's position. She kept moving, using the trees for cover, firing occasionally to keep them focused on her rather than the cabin. Suddenly, from the cabin doorway, Vaughn's voice rang out. Drop your weapons or die where you stand. Monroe spun around, firing instinctively. The shot went wide as Michael's shotgun blast knocked him backward. Wells, seeing his companion fall, threw down his gun and raised his hands. Don't shoot, he pleaded. Prescott made me come. Eliza emerged cautiously from the trees as Vaughn secured Wells with rope from the porch. Monroe lay groaning on the ground, his shoulder bloody from Michael's shotgun. You all right? Vaughn asked Eliza, his eyes quickly scanning her for injuries. She nodded, still gripping the rifle tightly. Is Michael? I'm fine, Miss Kincaid, Michael called from the doorway, though the bruising on his face suggested otherwise. These boys lack imagination when it comes to persuasion. Inside the cabin, they bound Monroe's wound and tied both men securely to chairs. Wells, terrified and eager to save himself, proved talkative. "Prescott knows you have the ledger," he blurted out. Tucker rode back to town and told him everything. He's planning to leave Los Alamos tomorrow with all the bank's money. Moving to Mexico, he said. "How did you find this cabin?" Vaughn demanded. "Followed Michael from town," Monroe answered grudgingly. "Prescott suspected he might be helping you." Michael grimaced as Eliza cleaned a cut above his eye. "Should have been more careful. They jumped me just after I got back." "What did you learn in town?" Vaughn asked. "Plenty," Michael replied. "The whole town's talking about Eliza's escape. Some folks are starting to question Prescott's version of events, especially after your father spoke up, Miss Kincaid." "My father?" Eliza's head snapped up. "Is he all right?" "He's fine. Standing his ground and telling anyone who'll listen that you're innocent. Got himself locked up for inciting unrest, but the sheriff's treating him decent." Eliza closed her eyes briefly in relief. "Thank God. What's our next move?" Michael asked Vaughn, "if Prescott's planning to run." "We stop him," Vaughn said firmly. "Tonight." After a hurried council, they developed a plan. Michael, despite his injuries, would remain at the cabin to guard their prisoners. Vaughn and Eliza would ride for Los Alamos immediately, hoping to reach town before dawn. "The ledger and money are our proof," Vaughn explained. "We take it straight to Judge Wilson. He's staying at the hotel while court's in session this week. He's a fair man, he'll listen." "And if Prescott tries to flee before we can reach the judge?" Eliza asked. "Then we stop him ourselves," Vaughn said with quiet determination. "One way or another, this ends tomorrow." They departed within the hour, the urgency of their mission driving them forward despite their exhaustion. As they rode through the night, side by side now on separate horses, Michael had insisted Eliza take his. Vaughn glanced at the woman beside him. In the pale moonlight, her profile was resolute, her posture straight despite the day's ordeals. The schoolteacher he had found hiding behind a stove just days ago had revealed herself to be remarkably resilient. Brave, determined, and increasingly difficult to view as merely an ally in his quest for justice. "We should reach Los Alamos by dawn," he said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Eliza turned to him, her expression solemn yet somehow peaceful. "I've been running and hiding for days. I'm ready to stand and fight." Vaughn nodded, a surge of admiration and something deeper warming his chest despite the cool night air. "Then let's ride, schoolteacher. Your reputation awaits restoration." As they urged their horses to a faster pace, the stars wheeled overhead, marking the passage of hours that would bring them either justice or ruin when the new day dawned. Los Alamos lay quiet in the pale light of dawn as Vaughn and Eliza approached from the east. The town was beginning to stir, shopkeepers opening their doors, the blacksmith stoking his forge, a few early risers heading to the cafe for breakfast. No one paid much attention to the two dusty riders who entered at a steady pace, their faces partially obscured by wide-brimmed hats. "The hotel first," Vaughn murmured as they passed the general store. "If we can get to Judge Wilson before Prescott realizes we're here, we'll have the advantage." Eliza nodded, fighting the urge to look around for familiar faces. It felt surreal to be back in Los Alamos so soon, riding openly down the same streets where she had once been respected, then reviled. Her gaze drifted toward the schoolhouse at the end of the street, its bell tower visible above the other buildings. Would she ever stand before her students again? They dismounted at the hitching post outside the Los Alamos Hotel, a two-story structure that was the pride of the small town. As they climbed the steps to the porch, the hotel door swung open, and Malcolm Prescott himself emerged, accompanied by James Tucker. All four froze in momentary shock. Prescott recovered first, his handsome, aging face twisting with rage. "Seize them," he shouted. "The bank robber and her accomplice." Tucker reached for his gun, but Vaughn was faster. His revolver appeared in his hand as if by magic, leveled steadily at Tucker's chest. "I wouldn't," Vaughn warned quietly. "Not unless you're eager to meet your maker, Tucker." People on the street had stopped to stare. Whispers spread rapidly as recognition dawned. The fugitive schoolteacher had returned and with a gun-toting stranger at her side. Prescott, seeing the growing crowd, adjusted his strategy. "Citizens of Los Alamos," he called out. "This woman is wanted for the theft of bank funds, and this man," he pointed at Vaughn, "is a known outlaw who has threatened honest men." "The only thief here is you, Prescott," Vaughn responded, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent street. "And I believe the judge will be very interested in what we've discovered at your hunting cabin." Prescott's face paled. "What nonsense is this?" He blustered, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "We found the money," Eliza said clearly, stepping forward. "And your ledger, Mr. Prescott, the one where you documented all your crimes, including framing me for a robbery you orchestrated yourself." Murmurs rippled through the growing crowd. Sheriff Jenkins pushed his way to the front, hand on his holstered gun. "What's this about a ledger?" he demanded. Vaughn, never lowering his weapon from Tucker, used his free hand to retrieve the leather-bound book from his saddlebag. He tossed it to the sheriff, who caught it reflexively. "Page 37, Sheriff," Eliza instructed. "October entries." Jenkins, looking confused but intrigued, opened the ledger while keeping a wary eye on the confrontation. His expression changed as he read, eyebrows rising in surprise. "This true, Prescott?" he asked. "You paid Tucker to rob the bank and frame Miss Kincaid." "It's forgery," Prescott snapped. "Obviously created by Westley to discredit me." "Then explain the money," Vaughn challenged, gesturing to his saddlebag. $4,800, hidden behind your fireplace. Exactly the amount stolen, minus what you planted in Miss Kincaid's home. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Several townspeople pushed closer, eager to witness the unfolding drama. "I demand you arrest these criminals immediately." Prescott shouted at the sheriff, but his usual authority had diminished as doubt spread through the onlookers. "What's happening here?" a new voice called. Judge Wilson, awakened by the commotion, stood in the hotel doorway. A tall man with a shock of white hair and penetrating blue eyes, he surveyed the scene with judicial gravity. "Your Honor," Eliza said respectfully, "I've been accused of a crime I didn't commit. We have evidence proving Malcolm Prescott framed me and is planning to flee with the bank's funds." "Preposterous," Prescott sputtered. "Judge, this woman is a thief and a fugitive. Her accomplice is threatening my employee with a firearm." Judge Wilson held up a hand for silence. "Sheriff, is that a ledger in your possession?" "Yes, Your Honor," Jenkins confirmed. "And if what's written here is accurate, we've got a serious situation. Then I suggest we adjourn to my chambers immediately to review this evidence properly," the judge decided. "Sheriff, secure that ledger and the money these people claim to have recovered." "Mr. Prescott, Mr. Tucker, you will accompany us, as will Miss Kincaid and—" "Vaughn Westley, Your Honor," Vaughn supplied, finally lowering his gun as the sheriff moved to take control of the situation. "Westley," the judge's eyebrows rose slightly. "Any relation to Harold Westley, who owned the North Valley Ranch some years back?" "His son," Vaughn confirmed. Something like understanding flickered across the judge's features. "I see. Well then, let us proceed to the courthouse where this matter can be addressed properly." As they moved down the street toward the small courthouse, the crowd followed at a distance, buzzing with speculation. Eliza walked with her head high, aware of the stares and whispers but refusing to be cowed by them. Beside her, Vaughn remained vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning for threats. "Eliza," a familiar voice called out. Gilbert Kincaid pushed through the crowd, his weathered face alight with relief at the sight of his daughter. Sheriff Jenkins moved to intercept him, but Judge Wilson waved the lawman back. "Let the man greet his daughter, Sheriff," the judge ordered. "These proceedings will be conducted properly, with all parties given fair hearing." Gilbert embraced Eliza tightly. "I knew you'd come back," he whispered fiercely. "I told them all you were innocent." "I know, Father," Eliza said, returning his embrace. "Michael told us you stood up for me." Gilbert released her, turning to Vaughn with gratitude shining in his eyes, the same hazel as his daughter's. "You brought her home safely," he said, extending his hand. "I won't forget it." Vaughn clasped the offered hand firmly. "Your daughter is quite capable, Mr. Kincaid. She saved herself and me more than once." Pride swelled in Gilbert's chest as he looked at Eliza. "That's my girl." In the courthouse, Judge Wilson established order quickly. The evidence was laid out methodically: the ledger, the recovered money, and testimony from both Eliza and Vaughn about their discoveries at Prescott's cabin. When Tucker, seeing the mounting evidence against them, offered to testify against his employer in exchange for leniency, Prescott's composure finally shattered. "This is absurd," he shouted, rising from his seat. "I've built this town. Without my bank, you'd all still be living in sod houses." "Sit down, Mr. Prescott," Judge Wilson commanded. "You'll have your chance to speak in due course." But Prescott, desperate and cornered, made a fatal miscalculation. He lunged for the sheriff's holstered gun, yanking it free before anyone could react. "Nobody moves," he demanded, waving the weapon wildly. "I'm leaving this backward town, and none of you are stopping me." The courtroom erupted in panic. People ducked beneath benches or pressed themselves against walls. Sheriff Jenkins froze, hands raised placatingly. "Malcolm, don't be a fool," the sheriff urged. "Put the gun down before someone gets hurt." Prescott backed toward the door, the gun now trained specifically on Judge Wilson. "The money and the ledger," he demanded. "Now." Vaughn had positioned himself near Eliza and her father when the confrontation began. Now he shifted subtly, angling for a clear line to Prescott without endangering others. "This won't end well for you, Prescott," Vaughn warned quietly. "There's nowhere to run. Shut up." Prescott snarled, his formerly dignified demeanor completely abandoned. "You've been a thorn in my side since you showed up, Westley, just like your father." "My father was an honest man who trusted you," Vaughn replied, his voice dangerously soft. "That was his only mistake." Prescott's laugh was harsh and unhinged. "Honest men are fools. Your father died a fool, and now his son returns to follow in his footsteps." The cruel words hung in the air for a heartbeat. Then several things happened at once. Prescott swung the gun toward Vaughn. Eliza, seeing his intention, cried out a warning. Vaughn dove forward, tackling Prescott as the gun discharged. The bullet shattered a window as the two men crashed to the floor, wrestling for control of the weapon. Despite his age, Prescott fought with the desperate strength of a cornered animal. The gun went off again, the bullet embedding itself in the courtroom ceiling. Sheriff Jenkins and several other men rushed to assist, but in the chaotic struggle, it was impossible to intervene safely. With a powerful twist, Vaughn finally wrenched the weapon from Prescott's grasp and flung it aside. He pinned the banker to the floor, his expression hard as granite. "It's over, Prescott," he said, his breathing heavy from exertion. "You've lost." As the sheriff and his deputy restrained Prescott, the banker's rage gave way to defeated bitterness. "You've ruined everything," he spat at Vaughn. "Are you satisfied now?" "Justice isn't about satisfaction," Vaughn replied, rising to his feet. "It's about setting things right." Judge Wilson restored order to the courtroom, his authoritative voice cutting through the chaos. When calm had been re-established, he addressed the assembled townspeople. "The evidence against Malcolm Prescott appears substantial," he announced. "He will be held for trial on charges of theft, fraud, false accusation, and now attempted murder. Mr. Tucker will also be held, though his cooperation will be noted." He turned to Eliza, his expression softening slightly. "Miss Kincaid, in light of the evidence presented, all charges against you are dropped. You are free to resume your life and profession with the court's apologies for your ordeal." Relief washed over Eliza in a powerful wave. She gripped her father's hand tightly as the judge continued. "Mr. Westley, your assistance in uncovering this conspiracy is duly noted. Furthermore, if the claims regarding your father's property prove accurate upon review of Mr. Prescott's records, steps will be taken to restore what was wrongfully taken." As the proceedings concluded, the townspeople filtered out, many approaching Eliza with apologies and expressions of support. The tide of public opinion had turned completely, washing away the stain on her reputation as thoroughly as if it had never existed. Through it all, Vaughn remained nearby, accepting thanks but deflecting attention. When the courthouse finally emptied except for the two of them, Eliza approached him. "You did it," she said softly. "You got justice for your father." Vaughn shook his head. "We did it for both of us." Something unspoken passed between them, a current of connection that had been building since that first moment in the mining shack. Before either could acknowledge it, Sheriff Jenkins returned. "Miss Kincaid, Mr. Westley," he said, removing his hat respectfully. "I owe you both an apology. I should have questioned Prescott's accusations more thoroughly. You were doing your job, Sheriff," Eliza replied graciously. "Well, I'd like to make amends," Jenkins continued. "There's to be a town gathering tonight at the hotel, a celebration of sorts, now that Prescott's scheme has been exposed. The town council specifically requested your presence, both of you." After the sheriff left, Vaughn turned to Eliza with a hint of amusement. "A celebration. Yesterday's fugitives become today's heroes. Will you attend?" Eliza asked, suddenly uncertain. With Prescott captured and her name cleared, what reason did Vaughn have to remain in Los Alamos? Vaughn studied her face for a long moment. "I believe I will," he said finally. "I find I'm not quite ready to leave Los Alamos just yet." The simple statement carried implications that made Eliza's heart beat faster. "I'm glad," she said softly. "I'm not ready for you to leave either." As they walked together into the bright New Mexico sunlight, the future stretched before them, uncertain in its details, but rich with newfound possibility. The Los Alamos Hotel's dining room had been transformed for the evening's celebration. Lanterns cast a warm glow over tables arranged around the edges of the room, creating a space for dancing in the center. Nearly everyone in town had come, all eager to witness the reconciliation between the community and the schoolteacher they had wrongfully condemned. Eliza arrived with her father, wearing her best dress, a sage green gown with modest lace trim that complemented her auburn hair, which she had left partially down for the occasion. She had barely stepped through the door before being surrounded by well-wishers, former accusers now effusive in their apologies. "Miss Kincaid, can you ever forgive us?" Mrs. Holloway, the mayor's wife, implored. "We should have known better than to believe Malcolm Prescott over someone of your character. The children have missed you terribly," added Mr. Peterson, head of the school board. "We hope you'll resume your teaching position immediately." Eliza accepted their contrition with grace, though part of her couldn't help noting how quickly loyalties shifted with the wind. Still, these were her neighbors, her community, and harboring resentment would serve no purpose. "Of course I'll return," she assured Mr. Peterson. The children shouldn't suffer any further disruption to their education. As the initial flurry of greetings subsided, Eliza found herself scanning the room for Vaughn. She located him near the far wall, deep in conversation with Judge Wilson. Dressed in clean clothes with his dark hair neatly combed, he cut an impressive figure that drew admiring glances from several unmarried women in attendance. Before she could make her way to him, the mayor called for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "tonight we celebrate the exposure of a terrible deception and the vindication of one of our most valued citizens, Miss Eliza Kincaid." Applause filled the room as the mayor continued. "We also extend our gratitude to Mr. Vaughn Westley, whose courage and determination helped bring the truth to light." More applause followed, with Vaughn acknowledging it with a modest nod. The mayor raised his glass. "To justice served, and to new beginnings for Los Alamos without the shadow of Malcolm Prescott's corruption." The toast was enthusiastically received, and as the small town orchestra began to play, couples moved onto the dance floor. Gilbert Kincaid patted his daughter's hand. "I believe a certain young man is making his way toward us," he observed with a knowing smile. Vaughn approached, his eyes never leaving Eliza's face. "Miss Kincaid," he greeted her formally, though his expression held a warmth reserved only for her. "You look lovely this evening." "Thank you, Mr. Westley," she replied, suddenly shy despite everything they had been through together. Vaughn turned to her father. "Mr. Kincaid, might I have your permission to dance with your daughter?" Gilbert's smile widened. "I believe she's earned the right to make that decision herself," he replied, giving Eliza an encouraging nod before tactfully withdrawing to join some friends at a nearby table. "May I have this dance?" Vaughn asked, extending his hand to Eliza. She placed her hand in his, feeling the same spark of connection that had been growing between them since their first meeting. "You may," she answered softly. As they moved onto the dance floor, Vaughn's arm slipped around her waist, keeping a respectful distance while still drawing her close enough that she could detect the clean scent of soap and leather that she had come to associate with him. "You're quite the hero tonight," Eliza observed as they moved in time to the music. "The returning son who exposed the villain and saved the town. Heroes are for dime novels," Vaughn replied with a hint of amusement. "I'm just a man settling old debts. And now that they're settled." Eliza asked, unable to keep the question at bay any longer. "What comes next for Vaughn Westley?" He guided her through a turn before answering. "Judge Wilson confirmed that with Prescott's confession and the evidence in the ledger, my father's property will be returned to me. The North Valley Ranch will be mine again." "That's wonderful," Eliza said sincerely. "Your father would be proud." "The ranch needs considerable work," Vaughn continued. "It's been neglected for years. Rebuilding will take time and resources." Eliza felt her heart sink slightly at his practical tone. She had hoped for some indication that his plans might include her, but perhaps she had misread his intentions. "Los Alamos will benefit from having the ranch operational again," she said, keeping her voice light. "And from having a Westley back in the community." Vaughn's steps slowed as he looked down at her, his expression suddenly serious. "Eliza," he said quietly, using her given name without pretense. "Do you know why I really came back to Los Alamos after all these years?" She shook her head, her pulse quickening at the intensity in his green eyes. "I told myself it was for justice to expose Prescott and reclaim what he stole from my family," Vaughn explained. "But the truth is, I never intended to stay. I planned to sell the ranch once it was mine again and return to Colorado." "And now?" Eliza asked, afraid to hope yet unable to stop herself. "Now I find myself reconsidering," he said softly. "For the first time in years, Los Alamos feels like it might be home again, but only if—" The music ended, interrupting his words. Other dancers moved around them, changing partners for the next song, but Vaughn and Eliza remained still, suspended in the moment. "Only if what?" Eliza prompted, her voice barely above a whisper. "May we step outside?" Vaughn asked instead of answering. "There's something I'd like to discuss privately." With her heart hammering against her ribs, Eliza nodded. They slipped through the French doors onto the hotel's wide veranda, now empty as all the guests enjoyed the celebration inside. The night air was cool and clear, the stars brilliant above them. Vaughn led her to the far end of the porch where they would not be easily observed through the windows. For a moment, he seemed uncharacteristically uncertain. "During these past days," he finally began, "I've come to admire you greatly, Eliza. Your courage, your intelligence, your integrity in the face of false accusations, they're remarkable." "You've shown the same qualities," Eliza replied. "And more," Vaughn shook his head. "I've spent 10 years hardening myself, focused solely on vengeance. It took meeting you to remember there could be more to life than settling old scores." He took her hands in his touch gentle yet firm. "I meant what I said about rebuilding the ranch, but I've realized something important. A house, land, cattle, they're just possessions. They don't make a home." Eliza's breath caught as he continued. "When I found you in that mining shack, you whispered, 'They said I lied.' And I told you, then let them watch me prove you true. I've fulfilled that promise, Eliza. Your name is cleared. You're free to continue your life as before." "But," Eliza prompted, sensing there was more. "But I find myself hoping that as before might include something new," Vaughn said, his voice deepening with emotion. "Someone new, me." The directness of his declaration took Eliza by surprise, though perhaps it shouldn't have. Vaughn Westley was not a man who dealt in half measures or veiled intentions. "Are you asking to court me, Mr. Westley?" she asked, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I'm asking for the chance to see if what I feel for you, what I believe you might feel for me, could grow into something lasting," Vaughn replied earnestly. "I know it's sudden. We've known each other only days, but they've been days of shared danger and trust. Sometimes that reveals more about a person than years of casual acquaintance." Eliza couldn't argue with his logic. The connection between them had been immediate and powerful, forged in circumstances that stripped away pretense and revealed true character. "My father always told me that when the right man came along, I'd know it with certainty," she said softly. "I believe he was right." Hope kindled in Vaughn's eyes. And do you know it now, Eliza? Instead of answering with words, Eliza took a step closer and raised her hand to his cheek. Vaughn remained perfectly still as she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief but filled with promise. When Eliza drew back, Vaughn's expression had transformed into one of wonder and joy. "I believe that's a yes," he murmured. "It is," Eliza confirmed, her own happiness bubbling up like a spring. "Though I should warn you, Mr. Westley, that school teachers are notoriously stubborn and opinionated, and cowboys are known for their patience and determination," Vaughn countered, his arms encircling her waist. "Especially when pursuing something of value." Their second kiss was longer, deeper, a true beginning rather than a tentative question. When they finally parted, both were slightly breathless. "We should return to the party before we're missed," Eliza suggested, though she made no move to leave the circle of Vaughn's arms. "In a moment," Vaughn agreed, equally reluctant to break the spell of their private moment. "I just want to remember this exactly as it is the night everything changed." They stood together beneath the stars, two people who had found each other against impossible odds, their futures now irrevocably intertwined. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, the schoolteacher and the cowboy, bound by justice, truth, and the promise of love. Spring arrived in Los Alamos with a burst of wildflowers and new beginnings. The North Valley Ranch, once the pride of Harold Wesley, was slowly returning to its former glory under the dedicated efforts of his son. New fences defined the property lines, fresh paint brightened the main house, and a small herd of cattle grazed on the lush spring grass. Vaughn surveyed his work from horseback with quiet satisfaction. 6 months of backbreaking labor had transformed the neglected property into a functioning ranch again. There was still much to be done: outbuildings to repair, more stock to acquire, hands to hire for the upcoming cattle drive, but the foundation was solid, just like his relationship with Eliza. Their courtship had progressed steadily through the winter months, weathering the scrutiny of the town with dignity and determination. After the initial excitement over Prescott's downfall had subsided, life in Los Alamos had returned to its normal rhythms, with one significant difference. Vaughn Westley was now a respected member of the community, and his regular visits to the schoolhouse were a source of much good-natured gossip. Eliza had resumed her teaching with renewed passion, her ordeal having deepened her appreciation for the simple joy of guiding young minds. The children, for their part, were fascinated by the story of their teacher's adventure and her cowboy hero, though Eliza was careful to present a more measured version appropriate for young ears. The sound of an approaching wagon drew Vaughn's attention. He smiled as he recognized Gilbert Kincaid's dray, with Eliza sitting beside her father on the seat. They had promised to join him for a picnic lunch to celebrate the completion of the main house renovations. Vaughn rode to meet them, tipping his hat in greeting. "Right on time," he called. "The perfect day for a picnic." Gilbert reined in the horses, returning Vaughn's smile. The older man had become a valuable ally in rebuilding the ranch, offering advice and occasionally labor when the livery business allowed. More importantly, he had welcomed Vaughn into their small family with genuine warmth. "Brought those preserves you like," Gilbert announced, jumping down from the wagon, and Eliza insisted on baking a pie, though heaven knows you don't deserve such treatment. "Father." Eliza protested, laughing as Vaughn helped her down from the wagon. Her hand lingered in his, a small intimacy they both cherished. "Thank you for the preserves, Mr. Kincaid," Vaughn said with mock formality. "And as for the pie, I make no claims to deserving it, but I'll certainly enjoy it nonetheless." Gilbert chuckled, collecting the picnic basket from the wagon bed. "I'll take this up to the house and get the coffee started. You two take your time." He winked at Vaughn before heading toward the freshly painted farmhouse. Alone with Eliza, Vaughn's demeanor softened further. "You look beautiful today," he said, taking in her simple blue dress and the way the spring breeze played with tendrils of her auburn hair. "And you look like a man who's been working since sunrise," she replied fondly, brushing dust from his shirt sleeve. "The ranch is coming along wonderfully, Vaughn. Your father would be proud." "I hope so," Vaughn said, offering his arm as they began walking toward a stand of cottonwoods near the creek, their favorite spot on the property. There are days I can almost feel him watching over the place. He is, Eliza assured him, just as my mother watches over me. She had lost her mother to influenza when she was 15, a shared grief that had created another bond between them. They reached the cottonwoods and settled on a blanket Vaughn had placed there earlier. The creek bubbled cheerfully nearby, and meadowlarks called from the grass. I received a letter from Judge Wilson yesterday, Vaughn mentioned as they watched the water flow past. Prescott's trial has concluded in Santa Fe, 20 years in territorial prison. Justice at last, Eliza murmured. The banker's crimes had proven even more extensive than initially thought, affecting dozens of families throughout the territory. Yes, though no sentence could truly compensate everyone he harmed, Vaughn replied, but it's over now, we can all move forward. Something in his tone made Eliza turn to look at him more closely. You have that expression, she observed. What expression? The one you get when you're planning something important, Eliza explained, a smile tugging at her lips. I first saw it when you were devising our plan to expose Prescott. I've come to recognize it, Vaughn laughed softly. You know me too well already. Not nearly well enough, Eliza countered, but I look forward to spending many years remedying that. Her words provided the perfect opening. Vaughn took her hands in his expression growing serious. I was hoping you might say something like that, he said, because I've been thinking about the future, our future. Eliza's heart quickened as Vaughn continued. These past months with you have been the happiest of my life, Eliza. You've brought light back into a world I thought would always be shadowed by the past. He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. I had planned an elaborate speech, but now that the moment's here, I find simple truth is best. He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a single perfect diamond. I love you, Eliza Kincaid. Will you marry me and make this ranch a true home again? Tears welled in Eliza's eyes as she gazed at the ring, then at the man offering it, the man who had risked everything to prove her innocence, who had shown her what true partnership meant, who looked at her now with such hope and devotion. Yes, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, Vaughn, I will marry you. With slightly trembling hands, Vaughn slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, catching the spring sunlight in flashes of brilliance. It was my mother's, he explained. The one thing of hers I managed to keep when we lost the ranch. I've carried it with me all these years, waiting for the right person to wear it again. Eliza touched the ring reverently. I'm honored, she said, and I promise to wear it with love. Vaughn drew her close, sealing their engagement with a tender kiss that spoke of all they had overcome and all they hoped to build together. When they finally parted, both were smiling. When shall we tell my father? Eliza asked, though she suspected Gilbert already knew of Vaughn's intentions. I asked for his blessing last week, Vaughn admitted. He was kind enough to grant it, though he did warn me that Kincaid women have minds of their own and that I should prepare myself for a lifetime of spirited debates. Eliza laughed. He's not wrong. Are you sure you're prepared for that, Mr. Westley? I'm counting on it, Miss Kincaid, Vaughn replied, his green eyes alight with joy. I wouldn't have it any other way. From the direction of the house, they heard Gilbert calling them for lunch. Hand in hand, they rose and walked back across the meadow, their steps light with the promise of shared tomorrows. When should we have the wedding? Eliza asked as they neared the house. The sooner the better, Vaughn replied without hesitation, unless you want an elaborate affair. Eliza shook her head. Something simple would suit me fine. Perhaps when the school term ends in June, that would give us a month to prepare. June it is, Vaughn agreed, and then, Mrs. Westley, the real adventure begins. As they rejoined Gilbert on the porch, sharing their news to his enthusiastic congratulations, Eliza reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. From accused thief to beloved fiancé, from desperate flight to triumphant return, all because a stranger had believed her when she whispered, "They said I lied." And he had kept his promise to prove her true. On a perfect June morning, with wildflowers in full bloom across the New Mexico landscape, Eliza Kincaid became Eliza Westley in a ceremony that united not just two people, but an entire community in celebration. The small church in Los Alamos overflowed with well-wishers, students and their families, neighbors, friends, and even Michael Thornton, who had ventured from his mountain solitude for the occasion. Judge Wilson himself performed the ceremony, a fitting completion to the circle that had begun in his courtroom months before. As Eliza and Vaughn exchanged vows, their voices strong and clear, many observed that they had never seen two people better matched in temperament and devotion. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Wilson declared with evident satisfaction. "Mr. Westley, you may kiss your bride." Vaughn's kiss was gentle yet possessive, a promise kept and a new one begun. The church erupted in applause and cheers as the newlyweds turned to face their community, now united as one. The celebration continued at the North Valley Ranch, where tables had been set up beneath the cottonwoods and a platform built for dancing. Children ran laughing through the meadow, older couples reminisced about their own wedding days, and young men eyed unmarried girls with newfound interest, inspired by the obvious happiness of the bride and groom. As the afternoon lengthened into evening, lanterns were lit, casting a magical glow over the festivities. Vaughn led Eliza onto the dance floor for their first dance as husband and wife, holding her with a reverence that spoke volumes. "Happy, Mrs. Westley," he murmured near her ear as they moved in perfect harmony to the fiddle music. "Completely, Mr. Westley," she replied, her eyes shining. "Though I must admit, I'm looking forward to when our guests depart and we can begin our married life properly." A smile played at the corners of Vaughn's mouth. "As am I," he assured her. "We have a lifetime of proper beginnings ahead of us." The celebration continued well into the night, but eventually the last guests departed, leaving the newlyweds alone at last. Standing on the porch of what was now their home, they watched the last wagon disappear down the lane. "Shall I carry you across the threshold?" Vaughn asked, turning to his bride with a tender expression. "I believe that's traditional," Eliza agreed, her voice soft with anticipation. Vaughn swept her into his arms with ease, carrying her into the house he had spent months preparing for this moment. The bedroom door closed behind them, and words gave way to the deeper language of love as they began their life together as husband and wife. 1 year later, Eliza sat in the rocking chair on the front porch of the North Valley Ranch, her hands resting protectively on her swollen belly. At 7 months pregnant, she had reluctantly accepted the school board's insistence that she take leave until after the baby arrived. Her replacement, a young woman fresh from teaching college in Denver, was competent but, according to Eliza's students who visited regularly, not nearly as interesting as Mrs. Westley. The sound of hoofbeats announced Vaughn's return from town. Eliza smiled as her husband appeared around the bend in the lane, leading a second horse laden with supplies. The ranch was thriving under his management, with a growing herd of cattle and a reputation for fair dealing that had erased any lingering shadows from the Prescott era. "Any news?" Eliza called as Vaughn dismounted and secured the horses. "Judge Wilson sends his regards," Vaughn replied, climbing the steps to kiss her hello. His hand automatically moved to her belly, and he smiled as he felt a strong kick against his palm. "Someone's energetic today." "Your son has been practicing his roping skills on my ribs all afternoon," Eliza complained good-naturedly. "Or your daughter is preparing to argue her first case before the court," Vaughn countered with a grin. They had chosen not to guess the baby's gender, agreeing that a healthy child of either sex would be equally welcomed and loved. As they sat together on the porch, watching the setting sun paint the valley in gold and crimson, Vaughn handed Eliza a letter. "This came for you at the post office." Eliza opened it curiously, then gasped softly as she read. "It's from the Territorial Superintendent of Education," she explained, looking up at Vaughn with excitement. "They've reviewed my proposal for a secondary school in Los Alamos and are providing funding for construction and supplies." "That's wonderful news," Vaughn said, genuinely pleased. He had supported Eliza's vision from the beginning, understanding her desire to ensure that local children could continue their education beyond the elementary years without being sent away to boarding schools. When will construction begin? Next spring, Eliza read from the letter, with classes to commence in the fall of 1885. She placed a hand on her belly. Just in time for our little one to see Mama in her element as the founding headmistress. Vaughn laughed. At the rate this community is growing, we might need to expand before our child is ready for school. The Johnsons just announced they're expecting their fourth, and the Petersons their third. Los Alamos is becoming exactly what it should have been all along, Eliza observed. A place where families can put down roots and flourish. She looked around at the thriving ranch, at the carefully tended gardens, the sturdy outbuildings, the distant cattle grazing peacefully. Just as we have. Vaughn took her hand, running his thumb over the gold band that matched his own. Do you ever think about that day in the mining shack? He asked. When fate or providence brought us together? Often, Eliza admitted. I was so frightened, so desperate, and then there you were with your steady calm and your unwavering belief in me. I think I began falling in love with you that very day, Vaughn confessed, though I didn't recognize it as love until later. When did you know for certain? Eliza asked, curious. Vaughn thought for a moment. That night at Michael's cabin when Monroe and Wells showed up. You created that distraction without hesitation, putting yourself at risk to help Michael. Your courage and compassion in that moment, he shook his head slightly, still awed by the memory. I knew then that I never wanted to be parted from you. Eliza smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder as twilight deepened around them. We've come so far since then, and we have so much further to go, Vaughn added, placing his hand protectively over hers on her belly. Together. As darkness settled over the North Valley Ranch, a gentle breeze carried the scent of sage and promise through the open windows of the home that love had rebuilt. Inside, a lamp burned warmly, illuminating the beginning of another night in a life that had been forged in adversity and tempered by truth. For Eliza and Vaughn Westley, the words spoken in desperation had become their foundation, a whispered fear transformed into a vow kept, a legacy of trust that would endure through the generations to come. 5 years later, 1888, the North Valley Ranch bustled with activity as preparations for the annual Harvest Festival reached their peak. Farm wagons arrived throughout the morning, bringing families from across the county to celebrate the season's bounty and enjoy the hospitality that had become a hallmark of the Westley home. From the wide front porch, Eliza directed the placement of tables and decorations, her authoritative voice carrying easily across the yard. At 30 years old, she had grown into her role as both ranch mistress and headmistress of Los Alamos Secondary School with natural grace, her intelligence and compassion earning her respect throughout the territory. Mama, look what I found. 4-year-old William Westley raced up the steps, his small hands cupping a treasure. With his father's green eyes and his mother's auburn hair, the boy was a perfect blend of his parents in both appearance and temperament. Eliza crouched to examine his discovery, a perfectly formed arrowhead of pale stone. That's a wonderful find, William, she praised. Perhaps you can show it to Mr. Thornton when he arrives. He knows all about Apache artifacts. William nodded seriously, tucking the arrowhead carefully into his pocket. I'll put it with my collection for now. Is Elizabeth awake from her nap yet? Your sister should be up soon, Eliza promised. At 18 months, Elizabeth Westley was the newest addition to their family, named for Eliza's mother and already showing signs of her namesake's gentle disposition. As if on cue, Vaughn appeared in the doorway with the toddler in his arms, her dark curls tousled from sleep, and her chubby face alight with excitement at the activity below. Someone heard the commotion and refused to sleep another minute, he explained, his expression softening as it always did when he looked at his daughter. Papa horse, Elizabeth demanded, pointing toward the corral where several guests were admiring Vaughn's prize stallions. Later, princess, Vaughn promised. First we need to greet our guests properly. He handed the squirming child to Eliza and surveyed the scene with satisfaction. Quite a turnout this year. The best yet, Eliza agreed. Though I suspect many come as much for your famous barbecue as for the dancing, Vaughn grinned. As long as they come, their reasons are their own affair. The Westley Harvest Festival had begun 3 years earlier as a small gathering for ranch hands and neighbors. Each year it had grown, becoming a tradition that marked the end of summer and the beginning of autumn preparations. Now families came from as far as Santa Fe to enjoy the community celebration. As the day progressed, more guests arrived. Gilbert Kincaid, now semi-retired and living in a comfortable cottage on the ranch property, held court near the barbecue pit, regaling younger men with stories from his days as a cavalry scout. Michael Thornton, less reclusive these days but still preferring the ranch to town gatherings, supervised a group of children in traditional games. Judge Wilson made his annual appearance, now white-haired but still sharp-minded. He had become a regular visitor to the ranch and a vocal supporter of Eliza's educational initiatives throughout the territory. Mrs. Westley, he greeted her formally, though his eyes twinkled with affection. Another successful event. You and your husband have created something special here. Thank you, Judge, Eliza replied warmly. We're fortunate to have such a supportive community. A community you've helped shape, the judge observed. Your school has become a model for others across the territory. I've recommended it to the governor himself. Pride warmed Eliza's cheeks. The secondary school had flourished beyond her initial hopes, with students now continuing their education locally through their 16th year. Several had gone on to colleges in the East, returning with knowledge and skills that benefited the entire region. As afternoon faded into evening, the festivities took on a magical quality. Lanterns were lit around the perimeter of the gathering, a fiddle band struck up lively tunes, and couples young and old took to the outdoor dance floor. Vaughn found Eliza supervising the serving of desserts. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Westley?" he asked with formal courtesy, though his eyes held the same warmth they had shown on their wedding day. "I believe my dance card has an opening, Mr. Westley," Eliza replied with matching playfulness. As they moved together among the other dancers, Vaughn held her with the ease of long familiarity yet the reverence of enduring love. "Happy?" he asked softly. "Completely," Eliza assured him, "though I've been thinking." "A dangerous pastime for schoolteachers," Vaughn teased. "What's on your mind?" Eliza's expression grew more serious. "The school is thriving, the ranch is prosperous, our children are healthy and growing. We've built everything we dreamed of 5 years ago." "And that troubles you?" Vaughn asked, puzzled by her pensive tone. "Not at all," Eliza clarified, "but I've been wondering if perhaps we might do more. There are children in neighboring communities without access to education, families struggling without the support we've been blessed with here." Understanding dawned in Vaughn's eyes. "You're thinking beyond Los Alamos. The territorial legislature has proposed funding for rural education initiatives," Eliza explained. "They're seeking someone to coordinate efforts across the region. Judge Wilson mentioned it to me last month." "And you want to be that someone," Vaughn concluded, not a question but a statement of recognition. Eliza nodded. "It would mean some travel, more responsibilities. It would mean more children receiving the education they deserve," Vaughn finished for her. "More communities benefiting from your vision and experience. You wouldn't mind?" Eliza asked, searching his face. The ranch runs itself these days with the hands we've trained," Vaughn assured her, "and our children are surrounded by family who adore them." His expression softened. "Eliza, I fell in love with your compassion and determination as much as your beauty. I would never ask you to diminish yourself to suit conventional expectations." Gratitude and love welled in Eliza's heart. "Thank you," she whispered, "for understanding. For supporting me in this. Always," Vaughn promised, drawing her closer as the music slowed. "As you've always supported me." As they danced beneath the stars, surrounded by the community they had helped build, Eliza reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a desperate encounter in a mining shack to this moment of mature partnership and shared purpose, it seemed both miraculous and inevitable. Later that night, after the guests had departed and their children slept peacefully, Eliza and Vaughn stood together on the porch of their home. The harvest moon hung low over the valley, bathing the land in silver light. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if our paths hadn't crossed that day?" Eliza asked, leaning against her husband's solid warmth. Vaughn considered the question. "I believe we would have found each other eventually," he said with quiet certainty. "Some connections are meant to be, regardless of circumstance. Like when a schoolteacher whispers, 'They said I lied,' and a cowboy replies, 'Then let them watch me prove you true,'" Eliza suggested with a smile. "Exactly like that," Vaughn agreed, turning to face her. His hands framed her face with tender reverence. "I promise to prove you true then. I promise to support your truth now and always, wherever it leads us." Their kiss was as sweet and promising as their first had been, a renewal of vows spoken and unspoken. When they finally parted, Eliza's eyes shimmered with emotion in the moonlight. "I love you, Vaughn Westley," she said simply, "today and all our tomorrows." "And I love you, Eliza Westley," he replied, "more with each passing day." Hand in hand, they turned toward their home, the house that had once belonged to Vaughn's parents, now filled with the laughter of their children and the warmth of their shared life. Above them, stars wheeled across the New Mexico sky, bearing witness to a love born of justice and trust, a love that would endure through generations yet to come. For in a land where truth was often as rare and precious as water in the desert, Vaughn and Eliza had found in each other an unending wellspring of honesty and devotion, proving that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a whispered doubt and the courage to believe despite all evidence to the contrary. And in Los Alamos, New Mexico territory, their story would be told for years to come, the tale of the schoolteacher and the cowboy who found each other against all odds and built a legacy of truth that changed not just their lives, but the lives of all who knew them. The end.